Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first live event in our brand new 84,000 in Conversation series. This is going to be an ongoing weekend series where special guests will drop by to share stories, histories, initiatives, and inspiration to help us understand how the Buddhist sutras can map onto modern life. Our conversation today will center around a set of fascinating sutras on the Buddha of Immeasurable Life. Before we jump into our conversation, allow me to introduce 84,000 and our guests today. So 84,000 Translating the Words of the Buddha is a global nonprofit, non-sectarian initiative with the mission of translating the Tibetan Buddhist Canon in its entirety within 100 years, starting first with translation into English. All completed translations are published for free online in 84,000's online reading room, which you can access at read.84000.co. We'll be referencing some recently published translations today, and we'll put the links into the chat box as they come up. Now, let me introduce our guests. First, we have Khenpo Choying Dorjee. Hi, Khenpo La, Destile. Khenpo La is...
Delay to everyone.
Hello, thank you. Khenpo La is a senior Khenpo at the Dzongsar Chökyi Lodrö Institute, where he received his Khenpo degree in 2004. He has since spent many years in various teaching and leadership roles at the Institute, including serving as a teacher for Sakya Dongse Avikrita Rinpoche. In 2011, he was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, and he also served as the head principal of the Dzongsar Institute between 2013 and 2016. On many occasions, Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche has appointed Khenpo La to give teachings and lead practices all over the world. So we're really pleased to have Khenpo La with us here today to share with us the importance of the tsemdo for the Tibetan tradition and its history of practice. Also with us today is Dr. John Canti, editorial co-director of 84,000. Hi, John.
Hi.
Hi, those of you who joined us for the 3-part talk on the Gangyur in April will already know what an incredible source of knowledge John is on all things sutra. He has been with 84,000 since its inception as a founding member of the executive committee, and he is a graduate of the University of Cambridge and is a founding member of the prolific Padmakara translation group. He has also studied with some of the greatest Tibetan teachers of the modern era, including Gangyur Rinpoche, Lodrö Rinpoche, and Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche. All right, so let's get right into it. The text that we're going to be discussing today are 2 versions of the Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra, or Tshe in Tibetan, tsemdo for short. There are also 2 extant Chinese versions of this text. One is called the 大圣无量寿经, and the other one has the more complete title of 佛说大圣圣无量寿决定光明王如来陀罗尼经. 84,000 has actually just published the English translations of both Tibetan versions, and we'll put the link to the translation in the chat box right now so that you can reference it. So I thought we would ask Khenpo La to start us off. Since this is a conversation though, John, please feel free to jump in whenever you might have something to add, or if you have a question for Khenpo La. And same thing, Khenpo La, if you ever want to add something when someone else is speaking, please just feel free to do so. So Khenpo La, can you briefly tell us about the importance of the tsemdo in the Tibetan tradition? Is this a sutra that is frequently encountered in the monastic context? Is this a text that lay practitioners might also come across usually? Please give us a brief introduction to the significance of this text.
Okay, thank you to Joie, to wonderful introduction to all, and thank you, and hi to everyone who is watching and who will be watching and listen to us. Well, this important of the text, the Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra, right? In a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I think this text is one of the most important text. Why I'm saying that it's historically and also commonly used, and also that very popularly practiced many ways. It is very important text for the Tibetan Buddhism, especially practitioner areas. First, why? Because it is also it is historically, actually it was the one of the first sutra which ever translated into Tibetan from Sanskrit and during King Tsunde's time. I'm sure John will tell there's more details later, but it is a it translated for practice. It's not translated for studying or something like that. It's translated for practice, for purposes. For start from, like during King Tsunde's time, many Panditas and the translators, they have discussions for hoping King Tsunde's longevity, to have a longevity, therefore they have discussions, and then they come across, a conclusion to translate 10 sutras as a kind of practice, which they believed is making King Tsunde to have a longevities. So start from that. It's also since then to until now, it's really play big role in a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner practitioner traditions. And then also this Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra, it's called the sutra, but actually it's not really sutra. It is belongs to the Tantrayana. Why? Because of that, when you look at the kanju, it is like the Jumbum section. It is in Jumbum section. It's not like a Paramitāyana section. It is Jumbum section. And not only that, it is also, the one Vajrayana practitioners, and when they practice, they always have to base on Buddhist root texts. So this Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra is the root text of the all different kind of the Amitayus practice, for longevity practice, which relates to the Amitayus. It's a really, really important text. So in so in the sense, it is the Tantra text. So when we interpret it, or when we explain the Tantra text, we always use 4 models. I think model is okay. Literally model, general, literally meaning, general meaning, hidden meaning, and ultimate meanings. Always Tantra text has these 4 meanings. So in a literally meaning, which we exist in the text, we use this for, like, for example, in the monasteries, the Buddhist practitioners, they cherish in life longevity so much, because they know that it's not easy to gain such a precious life. They really want to have a longevity, that if we have one day longer, we can have more opportunity to practice dharmas. That is the main purpose. So because of that, that everyone is wishing to have a longevities, regardless, these Sangha areas or lay people or monks area, whatever, everyone. And then they like to do practice pujas or for longevities. This is the one of the most commonly used as for puja. Then especially dhāraṇīs, inside the dhāraṇīs, I think it's one of the most used for both monks society and the lay people society. So this very important text.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. Yeah, John, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've also, heard about this text since I started at the very first getting interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and one of the ways it's used is that lamas who feel that somebody is having an obstacle for their life or something will give this as a kind of prescription, almost like a doctor saying, you need to recite this text or have it recited by the monks in the monastery, or write it out or sponsor it to be printed, and those kind of things, in order to gain the benefits for long life. So it's very widely used even by lay people too, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Those masters give them prescription to do puja, this one sutra is one of the one of the most used. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, that's so interesting. Going off of what both of you have said, and what Khenpo has said about this being called a do, a sutra, but it's actually included in the Tantra section of the Gangyur, and how you can see that it must have, the idea that longevity is not just this mundane long life. It's not just, it can be given as a prescription for actually extending someone's life, but that's like couched within a larger Vajrayana idea about, or maybe Mahayana and Vajrayana idea about the importance of the human life, and what, it kind of, I think it maybe shows that this idea is quite early. Sometimes people assume that, ideas like extra levels of interpretation on things that are literal, like, long life, maybe occurred later. But I think this shows that perhaps this was quite an early idea in this case, which I think is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And this, as we talked just now, as Buddhist practitioners or Buddhism, they wish to have a longevity. That is because they can practice more Dharma, can earn more merit and the wisdom to getting enlightenment. That is the ultimate goal. So in order to extend it or to preventing obstacles of our life, this our lifespan of life is conditional. It is very much depends on the many causal conditions. Like for example, in the sutra itself, it's already mentioned that in the people or living people in this zombie deva, the lifespan is only 100 years, but most of people will die before reaching this lifespan. It's because of like human beings, when we die, there are many ways. Actually, in the text, explain the 7 different ways to die. So we don't have the time to go so much details, but usually there's a die with the running out of the life, die with the running out of the karma, die with the running out of the merit. So if you're not running out your life or karma, but running out of the merit, there's almost 100% chance that you can extend your life. And also same like if you're running out of the life but not running out of the karma and the merit, there's also 100% chance if you know how to make it, you can expand it. Even the two, like life and karma running out, but merit is not running out, but they still have a almost 50%. That is, I'm just making up the 50% or something like that, but it's have a chance. And but if the 3 of them running out, then even a Buddha, like Medicine Buddha himself, come to you, but there's no any chance to make your life expand or to reaching the lifespan. So there's a it's many of them die because of that. The one of them running out, or two of them running out, and they die. So in order to adding those like life or karma or merit, there's individually there are many things, but this tsemdo, which we are talking about, this is not this practicing of this or reading, just also reciting the mantras in a literally, or if you have a more opportunity to do more systematically, or how to say more like sadhanas ways. And actually this will not only adding your life, but also karma and the merit. So it's like a it's how to civil bullet or something like that. I forgot. So anyway, this is it's one of them. Then it's preventing us from premature death. Premature death. There's many ways to premature death. Like actually sutra, the major 10 different ways to premature death. So anyway, in order to preventing from that premature death, this practice, reciting this and also resounding this sutra and reciting this mantra of this Aparimitāyurjñāna dhāraṇī, this is one of the best way to preventing from premature death and solving those problems. And then actually, so that what I mean in those kind of how to say perspective of the life is it's really kind of inconceivable for mundane peoples, but this is only the detail mentioned in the generally in the Mahayana teachings and especially in the Vajrayana teachings.
Could you actually tell us a little bit more about the types of sadhanas that are available or the types of practices? So you mentioned, there's recitation of the text, there's recitation of the dhāraṇī, and then, John, maybe you can also chime in about like how many sadhanas have been composed around this text. What do we have? Do we have particularly famous ones that are more commonly used today? What is the situation on the ground?
Thank you. This is very important. Since I want to really guide of how to practice, is I want to make also feel comfortable many those who wish to practice this. If one want to just practice it literally, which exists in the sutra, even though it belongs to Tantra, it's Kriya Tantra, right? Kriya Tantra belongs to Kriya Tantra. In the literally, if you read it and reciting this dharana, it is not compulsory to receive order transformation or initiation or something like that. You can read. Even in the text said, even you have not generated bodhicitta, you still can get those benefits. In the sutra itself, already mentioned that. Then you ask me, there's based on this sutra, this is the root text of the Tantra, and then those great Mahasiddhas like Amitābha and Jatare, Indian Mahasiddhas, such they not only knowing these literal meanings and the general meanings, but they also know the hidden meanings and the ultimate meanings. So based on that, they wrote like full instructions, which means the sadhanas, how to practice more systematic. Can I say like that? Systematic,
yes,
or
yes,
like a first, second, third what you should do, and the whole duration you should practice. There's very famous one, in the Drutap Kundu, which is collection by Joie Chen, actually start from the text is practice of the white Amitāyus of this, based on these sutras. And that in that one, and then also Rechungpa's, there's a very interesting history of the Rechungpa's, how he received this Sukhasiddhi, right? Sukhasiddhi traditions. That if we don't have much time and go detail that, but anyway, Tupejamo, that one is very popular sadhana Tupejamo traditions which Rechungpa bring to the Tibet and from India. And then there's Mitanzoki's traditions and Dataris traditions, and there's even those sadhanas also when writing based on this sutra, actually those sadhana wrote or that guide the practice is like more yoga tendriyana way or anayoga tendriyana ways. There are many sadhanas, and so those are almost equal popular in Drutap. They are all in Drutap Kundu in the first volume.
Thank you.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how you can sort of see, and thank you for your very clear explanations of this, Khenpo. It's one can see how the text like this started like as a kind of sutra, which is not that different from many sutras in which the Buddha Shakyamuni talks about the existence of another Buddha, another Tathagata in another Buddha field, who, if we know his name, or sometimes it's a whole set of Buddhas, like 12 Buddhas or 8 Buddhas, or we have actually translated some of these texts already, and some of them have dhāraṇīs. And the Buddha says that if we think of this Buddha and recite his names, then there'll be certain benefits. And those benefits, it seems, comes from the aspirations that that particular Buddha or Tathagata made long, long ago in the past, before they became awakened. And what's interesting in this one is that the Buddha is describing the Tathagata Aparimitāyurjñāna in this Buddha field in the upward direction. And right in the introduction of the text, when the Buddha's talking about his where he is, he brings up this point that the main aspiration and the main wish of the Buddha Aparimitāyurjñāna is to help beings lengthen their lives. So, although this thing about lengthening life comes in other similar texts, like the Medicine Buddha Sutra, for example, and as you mentioned, there's a section there where it describes, we published this a few months ago, where there's a description of the 10 kinds of premature death. So even though the Medicine Buddha talks about those kind of things and is beneficial, this particular Aparimitāyurjñāna is so special uniquely for lengthening life. And of course, there are some other benefits that are mentioned in the later parts of the sutra, like continuing maintaining the practice of Dharma in the world, and generally gaining merit and all kinds of other things, but particularly, this main thing. And then from that need, and with people practicing it, understanding it in different levels, it becomes the source of all of these amazing Tantra practices that developed. And Joy, you asked how many sadhanas there are. I would think it's almost uncountable. There are so many sadhanas of Aparimitāyus or Tsepame, however you like to call him, and in every tradition and in every different form, and at every different level of tantra and from every different lineage. I mean, every collection has so many of them. So it's an amazing thing to look at. You know, this whole range of texts.
Right. It's really paktume.
Yes.
It's really immeasurable.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, this might be
I'm
a
sorry.
good. Yes.
Before I forget,
Yes.
give me the one some time, and I forgot to tell that in just now. I said when you practice this Amitāyus Sutra, literally, it's not composed to receive the initiation or transmission. You can practice reading, resounding it, reciting those mantras. But if you want to practice like more sadhana, in which are I mentioned that in our existing dhāraṇī, which based on these texts, this text is root text, and then explore and the heeding and ultimate meaning, and then those Mahasiddhas wrote the sadhanas. If you want to practice those, then it is composed to receive proper initiation or transformation. You have to go the detail as instructed in that sadhanas, and then if whoever wants to practice just this literally in the resounding and reciting mantras, there's actually also there is instruction how to practice written by Joie Chen, and not only particular this sutra, but the dhāraṇī sutra, which he wrote, and the Nyamgo Lodrö also completed. And in that instruction, I would say instruction of how to practice this sadhana, of how to practice is a common way. And the first said that actually there's a few it is posted to Buddhas and those dhāraṇīs. And then secondly, there's two or three suggesting or giving them introducing mantra to us, which mantra will multiplied, like Om Sambhara Sambhara Bhamandasara Mahan Zavaham, Om Samhara Samhara Bhamandakara Mahan Zavaham. Those are two mantras, like if anyone recited before the dhāraṇī, it will multiply it, not only one or two, it's thousands and 100,000s like that. He said should recite those and then do chant or this sutra and or mantra alone. So there's also instruction I just would like to introduce in that is also existing in the dhāraṇī as well. Okay, sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you for sharing that with us, Khenpo. And everything you just said really shows how this is also a text that's special in that it really does straddle the space between Mahayana and Vajrayana. And there's different ways to read the text and understand it and actually practice it as well. So that's really interesting. Thank you. And John, actually, maybe this is a good place to clarify something that I've often been confused about, which is the actual name of this Buddha. So often, we say Amitābha, Amitayus, and now Aparimitāyurjñāna, I always trip up on his name. We kind of talk about them as interchangeable or as referring to the same Buddha. Are they? Are they referring to the same Buddha? Is this the same dpag? What do we know about the situation with these names?
Well, I can't tell you a definitive answer, but the short answer is they're kind of the same but kind of different. And in the Kangyur, these texts are found in the section which of the Kriya Tantra, as Khenpo was saying, and the Kriya Tantra section is divided into the texts which which deal with the deities and Buddhas of different families, especially the 5 different families. And these texts are found in the section which deals with the Lotus family, the Padma family, and particularly the section at the beginning of that subsection, the subsection at the beginning of that section, which is about the chief deity called the Tshe of the Padma family. So, and with these texts on Aparimitāyurjñāna, there are also texts on what we could call Amitābha. So in the classification, they're placed together as the same. They belong to the same family. They're the main Buddha of the Padma family. So in some sense, they're the same. And of course, we don't want to be too sort of materialistic about this. It's not like separate people with their own passports or something. There's obviously a kind of sense in which they represent a particular aspect of the enlightened understanding, of the awakened understanding. So we can't say that they're like 2 separate people or the same person. But my understanding is that the early Tibetan scholars also, they had some discussions about these different Buddhas, and one of the problem is that in Tibetan the names of Amitābha and Amitayus and Amitayurjñāna all got translated as tsepame, infinite life. Tsepame and upame, which is the Tibetan for Amitābha, are kind of often considered the same. But in one way you could say that there's kind of 2 tsepames, and there's the tsepame who is upame, who is the same as upame, just a different name. And it seems that in India, Amitābha was quite often called Amitayus. Mm-hmm. And then there's the tsepame who is really the tsedang yeshe paktumepa, so the Aparimitāyurjñāna. And the main, the distinctions of the names, of course, are there, but one of the ways that the early scholars talked about them is where they were, which Buddha field they were. So Amitābha, or tsepame, if you call Amitayus tsepame, is in the western Buddha field of Sukhavati, according to the texts about him. And this Aparimitāyurjñāna is different because he is in the Buddha field, which the name is given in the text. It's called the accumulation of incredible, limitless virtues, and it's in the upward direction. It's right above us. So if you go for thousands and thousands of worlds in the upward direction, you come to this Buddha field of Aparimitāyurjñāna, and there he is having these incredible aspirations for us all to live long. And I find that a wonderful thought, that there he is, and in the West there's Amitābha, and we can pray to be reborn there. But it's quite confusing. And in this sutra, it also says that one of the benefits of reciting is that we'll be reborn in the Buddha field of Sukhavati, in other words, of Amitābha. So, some people said, oh, well, that means they're the same. But actually, to be reborn in Sukhavati is a kind of common aspiration in lots of different texts. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking about Amitābha as the main deity, the main Buddha of this practice. So, and some people say, oh, well, because the Tibetans confused the names, they called it all tsepame, that's why. But I don't think it's as simple as that. And even in the Chinese tradition, it seems that, Amitābha and Amitayus or Aparimitāyus are seen as quite similar. It just depends on whether you're most interested in longevity or in infinite light, and right. Obviously both are really important. So I don't think you can say they're completely different. I don't think you can say they're completely the same. But there are these two distinctions between the upward direction and the western direction. And then some of the texts also talk about the Aparimitāyus of Akanishta or Omin, which is a kind of, really actually it's a kind of God realm. It's the highest of the God realms, but it's sometimes seen as a Buddha field, especially for the kind of Sambhogakaya aspect of the Buddhas. So, and then there's another name comes in, which is this Dundubishvara Raja, the Ngadri Gelpo, the king of the sound of the drum. And this seems to be more referring to the Amitābha aspect, if you like, of this Buddha. And the text which immediately follows these ones, which again we recently published, is got a very confusing name because it's also called the Amitāyurjñāna essence, the essence of Amitāyurjñāna, and it contains this dhāraṇī of the sound of the king of the sound of the drum, which is really Amitābha. So it's very confusing, but that's about all one can say.
Right. It definitely is confusing, but I agree. It's definitely not fair to say that the Tibetans just got confused, and because I think the conflation happens in the Chinese tradition as well, very much so. Amitofo, Amitābha, and Amitayus, Wuliangshofo is often talked about interchangeably, so that exists in the Chinese tradition as well. Khenpo, in your kind of personal experience, how was that? When in your monastic education, how was that explained? Was Amitayus and Amitābha considered the same?
Thank you. Yeah, that what John just now explained is very wonderful. It's really when Buddha, we needed to know, we needed to understand here. According monastery, a traditional Buddhist scholar, Mahayana Buddhist scholar, is the point of view. When we explain the Buddhist teaching, and because Buddha himself already taught teaching in a more according to the common perspective, and then teach little much deeper, is beyond the common mundane perspective, and then ultimate levels. The Buddha's teachings, every teaching has these three way to interpret it. It has a three way. So what John said, the like upper side and the west side, because in our common perspective, it's completely different. West and east, south and west, it's different directions. It cannot be both from one place, like from my place right, the east cannot be west cannot be east, and where I'm staying, that is a common perspective. But in the Mahayana, when go a little bit deeper for understanding what's reality, all the appearances are no other than mind. Remember, now all the phenomena, which means all the appearance and which I perceiving, or I seeing, or hearing things are no other than my mind. And so in this level, when it comes to this level, they will not contradict whether say the upper side or the west side. And in this level, I think that Buddha Amitābha and Amitābha is the same family of the Buddha. Of course, like Khyentse Rinpoche, when we look at Khyentse Rinpoche has many different manifestations, such as 11 head, 1,000 arms, and 1,000 ears, and 4 arms, and the 2 arms, like many manifestations. But it's the one Khyentse Rinpoche. And the one go to the ultimate level, it's just cannot be other than our natural mind. It's similarly the Buddha Amitābha and Amitābha is also similar. And in this level, actually no different. In fact, same Buddha, not only Amitābha and Amitayus, but actually all Buddhas is not in fact not different. And so it's just manifested according to the which form is more benefit for others, to making them to awaken. So in this side, Amitayus, for example, like based on these texts, there's sadhanas. Some of them sadhana wrote visualization. The Amitābha is a white color, and some of them red color. You know, it's the same Amitayus. And then also some of them wrote is more Sambhogakaya forms, which means so many ornaments and here and there. And another one is more like a Nimanakaya form. It's like very identical of the Amitābha, only different colors sometimes. So it's based on the depends on which form is more relevant or more beneficial for the the students. So anyway, in that sense, Amitābha, Amitābha, or Amitābha has a Sambhogakaya form, Nimanakaya, whatever. They're all same Buddha. That's why it's called the Lotus family. Lotus family belongs to Lotus family. It means the Western Buddha's family. West, right? West. Yes. So in that level, beyond the modern perspective, then some Buddha different forms. And right. Then go deeper ultimate level, those Buddha Amitābha and Amitayus cannot be other than our Buddha nature.
Wow, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that insight. I have this other question that might be a little bit technical, or maybe just speculative. So my question is this: it seems like this was perhaps the most popular Amitayus text in the Tibetan context. Is that correct? In Tibetan Buddhism, this is
that's right.
Amitāyus. Okay, this is the root text, which is very interesting because I'm just thinking about the Chinese context, and this text exists in 2 Chinese translations as well. So clearly it was also considered important and it was canonized. However, this text is not one of the root texts that informs the kind of, for example, a Pure Land school, right? So it's not, in the Chinese tradition, it never became one of the main texts for the practice of Amitābha or Amitayus. Which I find really interesting. So for example, there are 5 sutras that are generally considered kind of the root texts of the Pure Land tradition. And one of them, which is often called the Dāraṇī, the larger Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, which I believe also exists in Tibetan, in the Ratnakutta, in the Gunzek section, in the Ratnakutta section. That text, Khenpo and John, is that text something that is studied widely in the Tibetan context? And this is why it's speculative. Why do you think that this particular text became so central to the practice of Amitābha or Amitayus in Tibet, whereas, in the Chinese context, it was a completely different set of texts that became the focus of Amitayus practice?
Can I answer first?
Of course, Khenpo.
Okay. So root text means that this is Tantra text. Tantra text, the root text always be Buddha's word, and based on Buddha is a kind of more main constitution. It's and then those sadhanas and also bit instructions, commentaries, all are based on that and explain later that they are not called the root text. And then Amitāyus Sutra also can be root text. That is for mainly purposely to encourage people to reborn a Pure Land who wish to reborn in that purpose. But this is the tsemdo is purposely for temporary purpose, and the ultimate purpose all sutras same, but temporary purpose is that it's more to expanding and making stable the life, right? So in that tsedo, and then when it comes to the tsedo means making stable life and making completing our lifespan. So this kind of the practice, then it comes to that, this text is root text. That's the root text can be many different ways. And so another which you asked the question, I forgot. Can you, John, explain?
Yeah,
please.
Well, it was about, I think, the why maybe in Tibet the practice of Pure Land, as it was practiced in China, based on the texts of Amitābha, didn't really kind of take off in the same way. And I think that from my understanding, there was a kind of tradition of something like the Pure Land in China. There was a tradition in Tibet. A lot of it was based on the idea, in a way, this is the next stage when your life has been extended, but then finally it does run out. So what do you do next? So the next stage is to pray to very popular practice to pray to be reborn in Sukhavati, in Joie Chen, in the Buddha field of Joie Chen, where you can continue to make progress under the watchful gaze of the Buddha Amitābha, who is there to kind of welcome all those who sort of have confidence and devotion and pray to be reborn there. And even in this text, that aspiration is made. That if you recite this text properly and enough, then you're sure to be reborn in Joie Chen. And of course, there's inner meanings as well to that aspiration too. But I think that the specialty of Amitābha in that sense was very prominent one in Tibet. And in fact, of course, to be reborn in Joie Chen wasn't the only choice. But Joie Chen, there's a lot of prayers in the later Tibetan writings about being reborn in Joie Chen. But a lot of them are based perhaps not so much on the sutra you mentioned, the longer Sukhavati Sutra, which is in the Ratnakutta, but on the shorter one, which we've already published a translation, and it's called the I can't remember exactly the title, but anyway, it has the mention of Sukhavati, the Buddha field of Joie Chen in it. And of course, there were other choices, especially in Tibet. People were fond of praying to be reborn in Sangdoperi, the Buddha field or the actual kind of continent again of Guru Padmasambhava, of Guru Rinpoche. And I remember we used to hear that Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche and his Sayum, they used to kind of have these semi-joking discussions about, Kandrula said she wanted to be reborn in Sukhavati, in Joie Chen, and Khyentse Rinpoche used to say, no, he doesn't want to be reborn in Sukhavati, he wants to be reborn in Sangdoperi, and so they have a kind of choice. And some people say, Sukhavati's a bit boring, it's too stable, and in Sangdoperi there's more happening, there's more
yes,
rituals and things.
Sorry,
Yes,
did I interrupt you?
Not at all. Please
No.
go ahead.
Yeah. So it's John said it's actually also the Amitābha Sutra. I actually didn't research which belongs to the Renakutta or where is it, which section is it. But anyway, it's really popular as well in Tibet, the practice. And then there's some prayer which called the Dhamman, reborn in Pure Land. actually that is a summarize of those Amitābha Sutra. Of course, Amitābha Sutra is so long, so length. Most of the Tibetan people were illiterate in the past. So then those masters are very skillful, and they know that they have no opportunity to recite all the length of the sutra, and then they compose like Araga Akse, Tamid Demen, which is actually summarized of entire of this Amitayus Sutra, as well as also there's Korampas composed one of the very famous Ribona Sukhavati. So those are, even you are illiteral, but you can teach orally, make them to memorize, and then actually it's one of the most popular for lay people to practice of this Amitābhas. You know, this, it's a summarize of the Amitābha Sutra. That's why it's called the Shastra. It's not really real Amitābha Sutra, but it's also equivalent to popular texts in Vajrayana practitioner. So as John said, so majority we can say that they wish to born, especially lay people, they wish to born. Lay people means common people. I'm say Sukhavati. Sukhavati is the most popular universal, another universal for the Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. Everyone wish to reborn. Everyone pray for reborn. So it's also, it's the same like what Chinese Mahayana practice. And then also I just want to add something. It's really interesting what I found that you know, this Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra is also practiced by Chinese Mahayana widely. They practice it. Although not name is Tantra, but in Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, they naming it is Tantra. It belongs to the Tantra. So what is interesting that and this sutra, not only this, I think almost many other sutras like Serve Tambando, what called in English, Serve Tambando. I also don't know, Golden Sutra.
Oh yes, that's right. The Sutra of Golden Light. Yeah.
Golden Light sutras,
yes.
And also those are the commonly practiced both Tibetan Vajrayana practitioner and Mahayana practitioner, but the different names. It's really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Khenpo, speaking of, you were talking about kind of the condensation of meaning from a longer text into something, more condensed. Maybe this is a good chance to talk about the dhāraṇī in the text that we're talking about. And Khenpo and John, so we've just published two translations that are two versions of what seems to be the same text. The dhāraṇīs in these two versions are also different. We've also been getting some questions in the Q&A about the dhāraṇī. So can you just explain to us the situation? I know that there, has been some debate historically about the 2 Om versus the 3 Om dhāraṇī of this text. So can you explain that situation to us a little bit?
Yes, I'd like to jump in here a little bit to say, a little bit about the translations too, because actually this sutra, or these sutras, were translated for us by Peter Allen Roberts and Emily Bauer quite a long time ago. About 7 or 8 years ago is when they started. And originally we had the idea that we would publish them as one text and then just kind of have some notes about the differences. But when we had the text and we were sort of getting them ready to be published, we realized that, of course, in all the kanjuas, there's always been this tradition of publishing both versions separately. and we didn't feel that it would be a good idea to kind of merge them, really. So I started this process of separating them out. It was like a kind of operation to separate Siamese twins, the sort of take kind of bring out the differences between them. And I started looking into the background, and it was very interesting because the information is not very easy to find. The Kanjur colophon, there are no colophons for these texts in the Kanjur. There's really very little in the karchaks, in the catalogues of the different Kanjurs. Even for the most common version, we have to go to the Druptab Kundu, and the Sakya tradition preserved this idea that they were translated by Patsap and Punyasambhava, and there are some other writings, some commentaries and so forth. So it gradually kind of became clear, and I've been sort of sitting on this, and I'm very sorry about it. I've been sitting on this information for quite a few years, trying to finish setting it all out. And in fact, I finished actually, to be really honest, I finished rather late last night, publishing these texts with all the details in the notes. So if you want to find, if anybody would like to know more, then we have a lot of information in the introductions and in the notes about this. But the basic difference between the two texts is not very great, and it's really only in the dhāraṇī. And in the first version that we've numbered Toku 674, which is also kind of duplicated in the dhāraṇī section of the Kanjur as 849. There's the version which is called the 3 Om dhāraṇī, and it's called the 3 Om because there's kind of 3 passages that begin Om. And again, this is confusing and difficult. And then in the other one, the dhāraṇī is shorter, and the middle of those 3 phrases beginning with Om, that's in the first one, is missing in the second one. So we only have what's called 2 Oms. And that it's not just the Oms, but it's that central phrase that's missing. So you'll see the dhāraṇī is shorter, and it's quite easy to compare them. And after a lot of kind of research, it just to summarize it very briefly, it seems that the 2 Om version is the one that was, or is close to the one that was translated in the early period. So Khenpo was saying earlier about how this was one of the first texts translated at the time of Trisong Detsen. And it seems that the version that was around at that time in the 9th century, possibly even the late 8th century, was this 2 Om version. And the 3 Om version was brought to Tibet in the later translation period, probably by Patsap Nimadrak and Punyasambhava, who Patsap had been a very long time studying in Kashmir, and he probably brought the text back from there. And he's best known, Patsap is best known actually for his translations of the Madhyamika texts of Chandrakirti, but he did bring a few of these dhāraṇī texts and so forth. And so since we know that there was, we don't really have records of the texts before they were put together in the Kanjurs, which was only in the 14th century. But we do know from the early records that there was a translation of this tsemdo in the early period. And so we have to assume that that was the 2 Om version. And then we have a little bit of evidence for that in that there's a huge number of texts that were found in the Dunhuang caves in Central Asia that date. They've been dated quite carefully. They date mainly to the early 9th century. And there's thousands of them actually that have been found and preserved. And one can see them, I'll show you in a minute, but you can see them on the some of the museum sites. The images of them, they're beautiful actually, some of them. And some of them are just scribes practicing, But they, in the time of King Tri Rilpachen, the Tibetan authorities, I suppose, had scribes writing out the sutra like hundreds and thousands of times in order to get the same merits that are described in the text for the king, King Tshe Rinpoche, who actually didn't live very long, unfortunately, but he was dedicated to his long life. And so all of those early versions of the text are the 2-Om version. And it's a very long story. The actual translation in Tibetan that we find in the Dunhuang manuscripts isn't quite the same as the one we have now. So it looks as if the present 2-Om version may be a kind of back adaptation using the shorter dhāraṇī from the later translation. But anyway, that's a kind of detail. But I'd like to show you, if I may, just very briefly, the even older version that is I think the oldest version that we have of the text. Can you see that? And this
yes,
is
now we can.
This is a version that was found by Sir Aurel Stein in the caves of Dunhuang, and it's in Khotanese, and it's in this script which is called the Upright Gupta, and probably it's difficult to date certainly, but it probably dates to at the very latest, the 6th century, and may even go back further than that. It's actually in Khotanese language, but which is quite difficult to read. But the dhāraṇī itself is the 2-Om version of the dhāraṇī. And then we have a whole lot of early. These are the Nepalese Sanskrit texts, which came much later, and this one I think is probably only 16th, 17th century, and there's one here which is perhaps the oldest actual Sanskrit manuscript, which comes from Nepal and is dated to the probably 13th or 14th centuries. And then there's a whole lot of these Dunhuang manuscripts on the site of the International Dunhuang Project, you can see, and they look like this. Here's a sort of complete one. Some of them are complete, some of them are just fragments. And again, all of these are the 2-Om version of the dhāraṇī. And those ones are in paper. Here's another one in the form of a kind of a Tibetan style pecha with a hole in the middle where it was kind of strung together. So I don't want to spend too long on those, but just to show you that, those are the earliest versions we have. And but these two different versions of the dhāraṇī have been preserved in all of the kanjurs down the centuries, and they're both really obviously equally valid. There's been a lot of discussion, which is fascinating because it's always interesting when you see people debating, but there was a lot of discussion about why one might be more correct and authentic than the other, especially in the sort of intermediate period when after the first kanjurs had been published, and up till about the 16th, 17th centuries. Since then, most people just go with the 3-Om version. It's the most popular and the most widely used. But I think it's nice to remember that the 2-Om version is there, and it may even be the version that was used at the time of King Tristan Detsen and is said to have helped extend his life by 13 years. So it still has its power.
Yeah. And I actually...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can I edit a little bit on that?
Of course.
It's John really detailedly explained, and there is 2 versions of the sutra. Looks like exactly it's a how to say, edited or something like that. But actually, what's interesting is what I found that 2 versions are not only existing in Tibet, it was already existing in India, because there's sources you can find from Zetara. I don't know which century he was in, but he's definitely earlier. And one of the most popular tsedo, the practice of the longevity, which is written by the Zetara himself, he wrote sadhana, 9 devas of the Aparimitāyurjñānas. In there, he also instructed of the how to prepare the shrine realms, mandalas. One of them, what said, to provided 2 tsemdos, two tsemdos, which means the 2 versions of these Aparimitāyurjñāna Sutras. So that means that will convince me that these 2 sutra, it's not only happened in Tibet, it's already happened in India as well. So because of that, I think that both of them, as John said, is equally valid, and the sutra is because of that. When you look at the sadhanas and practice like Zetari traditions and the Metara Zoki traditions, Tripajamo traditions, when you look at that, they use both equally. And some of them, for example, like one of the Zetari, Metandozoki, Zetari Dalinam just tradition come through to Tibet. It's also the dhāraṇī is omnima. And another Zetari is sadhana is omsumma. So I think there's both of them are equally correct, and which one you can practice, you can choose which one. If you like longer one, then practice umsuma, and the shorter one, and then umnima. Even the shorter one, then amarana zvinda is so. There, I think no need to doubt for practitioners, because what I'm trying to say is, as a practitioners, when we practice this dharana, one of the obstacle is the doubt. When we practice the dhāraṇī, if we don't have the conviction in the dhāraṇī, for myself, and then we not get result what we wish for, what we practice for, So it's really, really important to oneself to have the confident in the reciting the mantras. So both are equally correct. What as a practitioner point of view, because of those great Mahasiddhas in India, and also great practitioners, scholars, even who have a full potential to instruct sadhanas of Amitayus, they encourage and they also instruct to practice the both. So we, as a practitioners, we sort of really have a confidence those Mahasiddhas who is giving instructions, and so there's no need to doubt as from practitioner point of view. Of course, in the scholarly, when we look at the text need to bring us, not we leading the text, right? Text will leading us, and we are not leading the text, isn't it? In the scholar way. So in this sense, yes, there is 2 versions. As John explained already, actually earlier translations are already 2 ohms, but some versions only have a 1 ohms. First, they call the 2 ohms, but the only actually in the text, even in Tanghong text, has only 1 ohm, right? So, but it's called 2 ohms, and later one is longer, 3 ohms. But anyway, the both are valid, and no need to doubt. Okay.
Yes, I just want to add that if people are really interested in the kind of discussions that happened in the early writers, the scholars discussing the authenticity, we've put some of the details in the, especially in the introduction to the second one, to the 2 ohm version. But as Khenpo says, this is discussions between scholars, and I think for us it's even easier nowadays to have real confidence in the validity of both versions, because we can see these old texts from Dunhuang. We can understand that there were, at least in Tibet, Sanskrit manuscripts for both traditions that were brought from India at different times. And we also know that I've showed you the one in Khotanese, came from Khotan, that also is from the so-called Tu Om. And as Khenpo said, we call Tu Om as kind of a shorthand for the short version. The Dunhuang manuscripts, actually, they're missing the first Om at the beginning of the whole dhāraṇī. And then Joy has been looking at the Chinese texts, and she'll be able to tell us that they are also what we call the Tu Om version, although they're only one Om, I think.
Exactly. They're also the two Om, but missing the first Om. So technically one Om.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now we have this kind of wide perspective, this wide panoramic view with all the modern methods, and we can see, I can sit here in the forest in France and I can see copies of all of these texts, so there's not something that was possible in kind of 13th century Tibet, but
Right.
we can now be very sure that all of these things were real authentic transmissions.
Right. Speaking of inspiring confidence, we actually have a special treat for everyone, because we actually asked Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche to record himself reciting the dhāraṇī, especially for this event. So John, could you just set that up a little bit in terms of which version is Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche reciting, and then we'll ask Ush to play it for us.
Yes, I think it's important to understand that even the 3 Om version, we have 2 copies in the Kanjur, and one is in the Tantra section, the Kriya Tantra section, and the other one is in the dhāraṇī section. At least that's the case in the Dege Kanjur and in quite a lot of other Kanjurs. And although those 2 copies are both the 3 Om dhāraṇī, there's a slight difference in one passage in the dhāraṇī. And the one in the dhāraṇī section of the Kanjur is the one that's the same as in the Druptab Kundu and is the one that's most commonly recited. And the one in the Kriya Tantra section is just very slightly different. And if you look at the translations that we've published, you'll get the dhāraṇī according to which text you pick up, according to the toku number. So if you've picked up toku 674, you'll get one version of the dhāraṇī. If you've picked toku 849, you'll get another slightly different version. And if you've picked toku 675, you'll get the 2 Om dhāraṇī. So the one that Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche has very kindly recorded for us is the dhāraṇī, just the dhāraṇī part, it corresponds to the one in the Druptab Kundu and in toku 849 in the dhāraṇī section of the Kanjur. So sorry if that's complicated, but just in case you're wondering.
No.
And we're going to try to embed the recording in the online version of the sutra, so you'll be able to find it there later, but I think we're going to listen to it now.
That's great. Yeah, if Ush, who is running the operations behind the scenes right this minute, Ush, if you could play that recording for us, that would be great.
Om Namo Bhagavate Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra Tenjo Rājaya Tathagataya Arhate Samyak Sambuddhaya Tadyatha Om Punye Punye Mahapunye Aparimita Punye Aparimita Punyajnana Sambaropachite Om Sarva Samskara Parishuddha Dharmate Gangana Samudgate Swabhava Vishuddhe Mahanaya Parivare Swaha.
That's so wonderful. And thank you, John, for making that happen as well, for getting this recording for us. And I think it's so wonderful that the online reading room supports technology like this, where we can actually embed the audio into the translation and people can click on it to listen to it. I hope that in the future, in other texts that we publish online, where there are dhāraṇīs or mantras, you know, if that is available for readers, I just feel like that's such a great resource. We have someone saying, please play it again. Lovely, thank you. Maybe, so we have about 15 minutes left, and we had a few requests. We had a request from Rinchen Dorjee. We had a request from Natalia Izzard to explain the meaning of the dhāraṇī a little bit. I know that that's often tricky because dhāraṇīs don't always have a literal semantic meaning necessarily, but either Khenpo or John, is there a way to translate or read into the meaning of this particular dhāraṇī? And if so, what does it actually say?
Well, we've actually got a note on this in the first instance of the dhāraṇī in the text. You'll find a note 56, and if I can just read the rough translation that Peter Allen made of the dhāraṇī itself, it says, Om, homage to the Bhagavan Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra Tejo Raja, the Tathagata Arahat perfectly awakened Buddha. It is thus, Om, the true nature that is completely pure of all mental events, the one who has risen high in the sky, who is completely pure in nature, whose entourage is of the great way, Svaha.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So that's
and
sort of...
Can I edit some little bit information on that particular for especially for practitioners? You know that dhāraṇī, when you trying to find out the literal meanings, it's actually just a very simple meanings. Looks like very simple meanings. Of course, as I mentioned that it has a literally meaning, general meaning, hidden meaning, and ultimate meanings. So what they explain right now in John is very much literally meanings. What I'm trying to say here that as a practitioner, when we practice the dhāraṇīs, it's not very important to understand each and every word is dhāraṇīs meanings. And of course, it's good to know that you have an opportunity to know the meaning of the dhāraṇīs. But what I'm trying to say that dhāraṇī is very different from the other practice. Dhāraṇī is the what called the mantra. Mantra itself has a tremendous power, what we call mysterious powers, because it's not conceivable for like generally people and mundane people, because how could have this dhāraṇī have such a power to make life the most stable and expanding? Also, how could make it accumulate merit and the karmas, editing the karmas, all those things. But this is a very it's already beyond from the ordinary peoples, because this will make the Buddha special. You know, the Buddha discovered the power and the potential of the dhāraṇī. That's why he taught, and not only himself, but all the Buddhas taught in these sutras. So you know, we quite oftenly asking how could have this dhāraṇī have a such benefit, power, and like this, you know. So what I want to say here, I always say this to my also other Dhamma friends, when we practicing this kind of the Amitābha dhāraṇīs, you know, this we as a who practice it best, generally the Buddhist practitioners. Buddhist practitioner means who already taken refuge under Buddha. What taking refuge under Buddha means who have already fully confident in the Buddha, who have a fully trusted the Buddha, who never deceived us, never lied for us. So we have already that. so because of that, that is not blind faith. That is, we have a many reason to believe that. What I'm trying to say that it is not important how dhāraṇī work, how dhāraṇī help, the link, this, because also it's inconceivable for us not to talk about the mantras, even talk about like a vaccination of this from this coronavirus. Actually, we all know it has a benefit preventing us from getting the new virus, but we don't know how it works. Most of us, we don't need to know also this. We only need to know vaccine is help, it effective, it project, and we need to have a trust in the scientists who are inventing it. That's all we need to. We don't need to know how the vaccine is preventing virus from us and this and that. Even we need to know that it's impossible unless you are become the scientist level of those who prevented inventing it. Similarly, these mantras, powers, all those things, it's not we are not yet to understanding this tiny subtle link between mantras, power, and benefit of those things. Also, we don't need to know about it. We just need to know that it has a power, what is a Buddha's taught. So then practice. So in that sense, otherwise, like when we just trying to find the literal meanings of the dhāraṇīs, it's just most of dhāraṇīs are very simple meanings. Like, for example, Namo Bhagavate Aparimitāyurjñāna Sūtra. That means it's just I'm posted to Buddha Amitāyus. That's exactly that. The first part of the dhāraṇīs. Like it looks like a symbol, but it's dhāraṇī itself has a tremendous power that is already beyond from our mundane perspective. So I just want to share this will help many practitioners how we can have the confidence in the practice, and then it will work. So sorry for taking long time.
Not at all. Thank you, Khenpo. That's such an important point, because I think while in some cases with certain dhāraṇīs, you can kind of construct a semantic meaning, that truly is not the point of a mantra or a dhāraṇī. And there is this idea that the condensation of certain syllables has an efficacy in and of itself. And to have confidence in that, as Khenpo said, is really important. And Khenpo's analogy also reminded me of that story of, one of the Buddha's disciples also, asked the Buddha to explain, how the universe works and how this and that. And the Buddha says, you don't need to know that. That's like, if you were hit by a poison arrow and you go to a doctor and you say, explain to me how this poison works and how, then you would be dead. And all you need is the doctor to tell you what to do. So thank you. That's such an important point. So I think we're going to wrap up, but just before we do that, John, was there anything you wanted to add just at the very end?
Not really, but I of course, what Khenpo said is wonderful and very important, and I think it's really interesting that there's so many of these texts and practices that usually we think that Buddhism is all about mindfulness, meditation, and all of that. But what are we mindful of? And the thing about many of these dhāraṇīs and practices is that they encourage us to be mindful of the nature of the Buddha and the Buddha and the Buddhas, the different Buddhas, and the it's kind of inconceivable the number of Buddhas and Buddha fields, and Buddha Shakyamuni teaches all about them and their special qualities, and it goes way beyond anything we can sort of rationalize. But the idea is that being a Tathagata has an incredible power, and if we can sort of just remember that without thinking too much about what it means, where they are, or, it's not a geography lesson, it's not a history lesson. It's some kind of way of tapping into this incredible power of the awakened mind, and remembering that it's there, especially. So all of these names and things, and some people prefer one, some people prefer the other. There's something for everybody, and we don't have to sort of do everything ourselves in a way. Of course we do, it's all us, it's all in our mind, but in another way to tap into the power and aspirations of these awakened beings is really the crucial point. And that's something that you don't necessarily find in a mindfulness class somewhere. It's on a different level.
That was very beautifully put. Thank you, John. I really enjoyed
it's been wonderful to discuss with you all, Khenpo.
Yeah, I really enjoyed today's conversation. I felt like it was so special to have these different perspectives all come together. Khenpo, you both brought in kind of a scholarly perspective as well as a practitioner's perspective, which I feel like is really important. And same thing, John, you really, you brought in your own experience as well as your expertise with these texts. And, you've spent so much time working on these texts and editing them that you really know them through and through. So thank you both for sharing your time and expertise. It's really been enlightening for all of us. And thank you also to everyone who's been listening in and watching this. We'll wrap up here for the day, but we hope to see you at other 84,000 in Conversation events in the near future. We'll be inviting scholars and teachers, artists, and friends from all walks of life to join us in these conversations. And we hope that you find them informative, inspirational, and hopefully not too stuffy. So please stay tuned for more information. And for now, take care and be well. Thank you, everyone.